Everyone. Welcome or afternoon. Welcome to this webinar presented by the Division for Research. Today we are doing our academic job search webinar number 5. And if we want to go ahead and go to the next slide here, our focus for today is thinking about the academic job talk. So our session is titled, What About the Job Talk? Our primary host for today will be Bree. Bree, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Bree Jimenez, and I'm at the University of Texas at Arlington, an associate professor here.
All right. And Jessica Tost is going to be monitoring the chat and the participants. Jess, do you want to say hi?
Hi, everyone. Hope you're having a good Friday. I'm Jess Tost from the University of Texas at Austin.
And I'm Sarah Powell, also from the University of Texas at Austin, and we're very excited for you to join us today. As you know, if you've joined into any of our other webinars, this webinar is presented by the Council for Exceptional Children and the Division for Research. And if we go to the next slide, Bree, we will see that we have done 5 of the 6 webinars. If you missed any of the first 4 webinars, those are available on the Division for Research's YouTube channel. And then next Friday, if you'd like to join us, we will be talking about the job negotiation process. So I have an offer, now what? So we'll be talking to you about how to negotiate your contract to make it optimal for you. And we will also post that session on YouTube if you are unable to join us next Friday. Next slide, please. And then finally, this webinar series is brought to you by the Division for Research, as I said. And if you do like this webinar and you want similar programming, please consider a small donation or large donation via PayPal, or consider joining the Division for Research through the Council for Exceptional Children when you either join the CEC organization or when you renew your membership. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Bree. And Bree, take it away.
All right, great. We do have Jess is monitoring the chat box, so please feel free to add any questions in that you have, and we will take brief pauses to answer those questions or try to answer them right then and there. So please just feel free to jump in with the chat box, and we'll have field any questions that you guys have along the way. So thank you so much for joining us. I am excited to talk today about the fun part, which is you've got an on-campus interview. So all your hard work from working on your application and everything is now paid off, and you have been invited on campus for an interview. So last week, we talked about the on-campus interview and all the different people that you'll meet, all the different things that you'll do, how your schedule might be laid out, and all the stakeholders that you'll be meeting with. And then we talked a little bit about the spade work that Jess talked about, of kind of that the work that you need to do to get ready and all the other things to prepare for your on-campus interview. And if you remember in the job talk, or you remember in that on-campus interview and thinking about it, there often are a couple different presentations that you might be asked to make when you come on campus. So one of them was the research talk. So today is really, we will spend majority of our time talking about your research presentation. And then we'll also spend some time talking about teaching as well, if you're asked to make a teaching presentation. So when thinking about the research presentation, if you've not attended one before, maybe in your doctoral program, there was an interview process where you were able to come in and even listen to someone do a research presentation. Thought it would be good to talk about, who attends. So a lot of the job interview when you're on campus, you'll be meeting with specific people like the Dean of Research, or you'll be speaking with the department chair, or you'll be speaking with the committee or the program that you're applying to be a part of. But when it comes to the research talk, usually it's something that is open and publicly kind of, within the School of Education or whatever college you're applying to, where they open it up for anyone to attend. So that's kind of important to think about when you're planning. So typically the entire College of Education or School of education and social work, or whatever it is, will be invited to attend. Um, Expect faculty across multiple departments. This is, the only chance usually that people will have to meet you and listen to you as somebody who will be coming in to contribute to not just your program, but the school overall. And this is widely attended by other people from other departments. Um, Also think about the fact that often you will have met this person already, but the associate dean of research, the dean themselves, faculty from other departments. You could have people outside of your department as well. It just depends on the university of how widely they share your schedule for the day. So you could have a wide range of people. Typically, this research talk is something that's done in a large auditorium or a large classroom to accommodate that larger crowd of people. So think about that and kind of be prepared that you may be walking into a large room where you're kind of, on a stage. I've had one where I actually was on more of like an auditorium stage. And so just kind of prep yourself mentally for that, because that can feel quite overwhelming when you walk in and weren't quite ready for this large auditorium. But often it's in a large classroom or a larger meeting space within the School of Education. You could have 15 people, you could have 30, you could have larger. It really depends on the size of the college, but expect a larger crowd to be presenting to. So when you're thinking about preparing for that research presentation, there's quite a bit that goes into it, and thinking about making sure that you're ready for it and that you can show your greatest attributes when it comes to being a researcher, and your trajectory moving forward. So most of the time, people will, don't get too fancy. Most of the time, people will come in with some sort of presentation like a PowerPoint that they will be giving their talk to guide them through their talk. Most of the time, we're given about an hour. You'll know ahead of time based on your schedule that is provided to you of what time slot you have. And if you remember from previous webinars, people also talked about a lot of times you're given maybe 15, 20 minutes before your research presentation. And this is a great opportunity to slow down. Someone mentioned go hide in the bathroom and just prep yourself. So usually within that hour, people will kind of divide out the time. So I would suggest maybe thinking about 45 minutes or so that you are presenting within this time. And we'll talk about kind of the components that would be part of that. And then think about making sure that you give ample time for questions. This is the opportunity, the only opportunity that several people, like from other departments, will have an opportunity to meet you and talk with you and ask you questions about your research and your research line. So you want to make sure that you give people a good enough amount of time where you're not just talking at them for too long and they don't get that chance to engage. So most of the time people do not bring handouts unless you're asked. You don't need to be prepared to have, a stack of 30 handouts to go with your PowerPoint or something like that. I have seen someone before create a link that they had a QR code, and on that link it had samples of their previous research that they were going to be talking about, or other things that they could share with people who were interested, but not handing out handouts. Do plan though to put your PowerPoint on a flash drive that is empty, that you can hand over to someone to get your presentation set up. You don't want to be in the position where now it's on my laptop and you guys already, you don't have the connections to your laptop, or you say that your presentation is on this flash drive and now you've got to open up 5 folders to get into it. Be prepared. Show that you're ready. You've got your flash drive right here or your presentation right here, and it's really easy to hand it off to an administrative assistant who might be getting your presentation loaded up or whatever. Anything you can do to cause less stress and anxiety for you those few minutes leading up to your presentation is going to help you out in the long run of just being ready, and it's no problem. Here it is. So just kind of a little tip for that. So your research presentation is broken up into different sections, really. And the first section would be a brief interview, or a brief introduction, sorry. Think about coming in and the fact that this is probably the first time that you're meeting a large majority of the people in your audience. They don't know you. All they know is your name, and they might have been provided a link to your Vita, but most likely they don't know a lot about you and or your research. So, rather than jumping into slide number 1 as the introduction to your study and jumping into your methods, take just a couple minutes to introduce yourself, maybe, tell a little bit of where you're coming from. And I'm talking about something like 3 to 4 minutes, not long. Don't waste too much time here. You're going to explain who you are through your presentation and through your research agenda. But rather than just jumping straight in, try to be personable, engage people. Because if you think about it, this is the research presentation, but you're also showing who you are as a colleague and a person. And so you do want to be as personable as you can while remaining professional. So now, the major chunk of what we'll be doing and your research presentation is to share your research. So one of the things to think about is you do have an hour, but you need to also talk about who you are as a researcher. So you don't want to spend too much time. Now, from my experiences leading up, often when I would present research, it was at a research conference. And you were given a 45-minute or an hour slot to share your research or your dissertation, in which you had much longer to really talk about this one study. So it's going to be really important that you think about how to condense your research into a presentation that's only 30 minutes. It's not long, and it'll go by really quickly because it's a topic you're passionate about and a topic you know a lot about. When you're thinking about your research study that you are going to present, you may have your dissertation that you would like to present. You may have multiple studies that you've done. Look for something that has been either published first or submitted for publication and accepted. And if you don't have that, it could be your dissertation, or it could be something else that is submitted but you haven't heard back yet. That would be I would kind of go in that rank. You would like to have something that's published or your dissertation. Most early, new graduates and early career people who are looking for a job are going to present on their dissertation, or at least an area in which they plan to continue a line of research within. So one thing to think about, though, is be careful presenting research that you did not lead. When you're out there at the research presentation, you want to show who you are as a researcher, your capabilities and your strengths within research methodology, your ability to analyze the methods, the results, and you want to show your leadership as an early career or a researcher in the field. So although you may be very excited about, and it may be a great study you were a part of as fourth author, it may not be the best research for you to share. So be careful that you think about how this study that you choose, one study, is something that really is going to showcase you and your capabilities rather than the research team and their capabilities you came from. So I think sometimes when we think about research and we think about jumping in, as a special ed researcher myself, I jump in with this assumption that people know what I'm talking about. This assumption of using acronyms, using jargon, and them being things that people would know, because I'm so often talking to other special educators. Remember that not everybody who came to your presentation is in your field. Most likely, only 5 or 6 of those people that are out there are actually in your field. So you want to spend a little bit of time introducing your research and really translating it, helping people understand why what you are going to talk about is important to the field, where it kind of sits within the field. These are some of the things that we've known. These are some of the research in the past. And this is why it is so important that we are looking at, that I'm looking at this question right now, or we're gathering this data right now. So remember, not everybody may even be in education. So you may have people within your department that are across various different fields, such as translating, I'm thinking social work, psychology, and then you have other people who are other educators, maybe in math education, and aren't real versed on some of the pressing issues within special education. So take that time and introduce what you're doing, and be careful with the jargon and the acronyms. So use the least amount as you possibly can, or when you do, don't make the assumption. Take a moment just to explain what this acronym is. Make sure to think about what impact your research has. So it's important to the field, but my specific research is, moving us this way, or I'm asking these hard questions to get the information, or this replication work is doing this. And so think about how timely and necessary your research is, because you might know how timely and necessary, and people in your immediate field might, but other people outside might go, well, we've known that for a long time. Why are you doing that? That seems kind of old, or that seems, not important or not relevant, or I wouldn't even see why that's important. So try to articulate that as you're translating your research through your research presentation. So really thinking about this research presentation is more than you showing your introduction, methods, results, and discussion. It's helping people see why you are someone they want to work with, because you are the person who is going to be there bringing their college to the next level. And possibly a colleague to work with. So then the next thing is link to your past experiences. But I caution you to stay grounded in the literature. So trying to make your research relevant is talking about, as I'm out in the field, in this situation, we've been collecting data with paraeducators for the last, the team has been collecting it, and what we keep seeing is this and that. And now we know the literature supports this as well. But connect yourself to being someone who isn't just reading a book and doing research, but someone who is connected to the communities they work with and the schools they work with, and their colleagues, and looking at that as a way to kind of personalize your research and also sell your research agenda. So your research study presentation, like I mentioned before, will have a couple different components. You will introduce yourself, and then you'll start to get into this one study, whether it be your dissertation or something else. And so typical research presentation style, you're going to start off with an introduction, then you're going to move to the methods. But in this, because you have limited amount of time and because you are sharing your research, but different than a conference. At a conference, you're sharing your research because the people who came genuinely want to know more about your topic. In a research presentation, that could be true, but first and foremost, they're there to see who you are as a researcher. They may not care at all about your research topic. And that's not really the purpose of this research talk. It's for you to talk about who you are as a researcher and to be able to showcase your skills as a researcher and someone that they would want to work with in the long run. So we start off with the introduction, and you want to start with prior literature. And like we would, and the importance of your topic, and the studies that have, contributed, and how this study that you're talking about right now, contributes to the field. Remember that you don't have a lot of time. So again, kind of going back to knowing your audience, make sure that you are helping that audience understand why your research is needed. Something to think about here is, again, those acronyms get really heavy within this, but you don't want to spend too much time on the introduction, but you do want your audience to know how grounded and how important it is. But remember, you're going to talk about your research agenda next. And this is another opportunity where you can go in to show the big picture of where this study fits in with the larger scheme of what you've done and what you plan to do. So the next section is really the methods. After the introduction, we get into the methods of what you did. Clearly defining your research questions. That's something that I've seen sometimes often skipped over. Kind of just going into, this is why it's important and here's what I did. But making sure that your research questions are either part of your introduction leading into your methods and or immediately within your methods. What is it that you were trying to figure out? And be really careful that you keep circling back to those. So I set out to find out these things, and this is the results and how they're linking back. So I was speaking with our dean, my dean of the School of Education, and one of her suggestions of questions that she likes to ask new scholars coming in and interviewing is to ground their research design and their methodological theory. And I thought, what a great question, but also something that could really catch us off guard and kind of make us nervous. So I wanted to add that here, thinking about why would you choose your design, and spend a moment or two explaining. Once again, you've got a wide range of people and using various different methodologies, and depending on what department and what area they're coming from, they may not be methodologies that they are very familiar with. So it's important to kind of ground, why did you choose this method? Not just, I did this kind of study, but in determining what would best, work with my research questions, this is why I chose this research methodology. And here's how it's grounded in what I'm doing. So reviewing your research methods with enough detail to demonstrate your ability as a high quality researcher. 30 minutes is not long. But what you want to do is keep going back as people care a little bit about your topic. They care a little bit about your results, but what they care about is the instruments you use, the methodology that you use, and your ability to analyze your data. So thinking again about this, it's really important that you spend time thinking about, out of everything that you could tell, what is it that's going to be most important and highlight your strengths as a researcher, as a lead researcher within this study. And so spending a little bit of time about that would be really important and something to kind of go through. Don't forget that, as you go through this, I know it's hard taking a dissertation that is huge and trying to narrow it down into a 30-minute presentation is sometimes feels quite overwhelming. So really, reach out to other people, practice your presentation with your colleagues, get feedback on from people who maybe don't know your study really well. Did you give them enough information to be able to understand the methods that you're using? So we just got a question from Victoria. If you get an on-campus interview prior to finishing your dissertation, should you, which would probably mean to pick a different study to discuss in the research presentation, would you mention the dissertation as part of the research plans and your research line? Yes. So I think that depending on where you are in the dissertation phase, you could still present your dissertation if you have data, but you may, if you have something else to present, that may be a good idea, and use your dissertation as part of your research agenda. So definitely, and that does happen quite often. And I've seen people present their dissertation, especially if they're already collecting data and they've got some data to analyze. They're just not ready to, it's not finished. So that would kind of be your call of how much data you have and if they think that would be a good one. But if you do have something that's completed before that you really had a leadership role on, I think that might be better to be able to show something from start to finish. So, of course, we've done the introduction, you've done the methods, now we get into the results and the discussion. So typical research presentation, think about your results and highlighting key findings, and make sure that they are linked to your research questions. If there are some research findings that you plan to use later to guide your research agenda, you may want to highlight those. So for example, you have research and you showed that this intervention was effective to teaching students math. However, there was another subset within the social validity of how the teachers felt. And you plan to pursue this as part of your research agenda in your next phase. You may want to quickly highlight that in your results, because that's going to set you up to show your next phase when you start to talk about it. So use tables and figures, explain your results. Remember, you've only got a limited amount of time and you've got a wide range of participants in your audience. So, if you want to show your ability technically, but you also want to help show that you can talk the talk and you can look at your results, but you also have the ability to translate your results to help other colleagues and educators understand how important these findings are or what they were. So don't just read your PowerPoint. Don't just say, okay, the p-value, and just start reading stuff out. Start to explain it. Tell us why that p-value is, and why it's significant, or why this, or why that, or why we need to pay attention to these two components of your graph and how important that is in the translation of what you found. So show your ability. That's a great way to highlight how strong you are within your methodology, is how you were able to implement your research, but how you're able to translate your results. And then your discussion. Obviously, the significance of your finding. I think you should highlight your limitations, because again, that shows your understanding of your methodology. However, do that briefly. Move on. Don't spend too much time talking about what you could have, should have done, and and any of that. But don't just skip it. And then future research. And I would actually probably add a whole separate PowerPoint slide to your future research based on your findings. So again, you can link back to your results and say, remember in the results, one of the things we actually found was future research is needed. Help people see that translation and highlight the future research you want to do. Not just, it'd be great if people out there would do this other research. Spend time on the things that you want to move forward with. And so that's going to link you to this next part, which is the research agenda. One thing I didn't mention, and kind of a little pet peeve of mine, is when you're talking about your research, you may have other authors that are part of this research with you. Be careful to just continue. You've given, give them acknowledgement at the beginning. This is a research study. These are the authors of the research study. And then start to say, one of the things I think is important, what I did. Try to use I as much as you can. It's all right to say we, but what I want to see is, as a researcher, your ownership to the research. If it's your dissertation, it's your dissertation. You may publish it with other people, but it's still, this is the reason I needed to do this research. And own that research rather than saying our research team did this, our research team, because what's hard for me to see and separate is you as a research team, and you're not bringing your whole team with you. So now what, when you get here? I want to see you owning the research. So the last part of the research presentation is your research agenda. And make sure that you give yourself ample time. I think I've got it as a tip later, but practice, practice, practice. The worst thing you can do is be flipping through slides because you ran out of time and you don't get to talk about things. It doesn't look good, and we're losing great opportunity to get to know you as a researcher. So your research agenda is sometimes a little tricky, depending on your experiences in your doctoral program or postdoc. And so your research agenda is there to show who you are as a researcher, opposed to who you were in that as a researcher in that one study. And so how does your current and future research really link and make a clear path? So your whole goal is to show this clear idea of who you are as a researcher now and who you want to become over time. So, think about it as this tool that you're going to communicate. What is it that's going to communicate this? Is it a PowerPoint slide with bullets? Is it a timeline? Is it a graphic? What is going to work for you to articulate your interests moving forward in your line of research? At this point, you've shown that you have the ability to conduct research and high quality research, and you've got the skills. But what's going to happen when you move? You are in a new place, and who do you want to be moving forward? And that may be well aligned to your dissertation, or it may it may take another pivot or be connected, but in a different way. So think about your current line of research. Who are you right now? What publications do you have or submitted, or your dissertation? What studies have you been a part of? And or what activities are you doing? So maybe you have been part of some research activities within your doctoral program. Maybe you're not an author, but you're a research assistant on a grant where you have been engaging in a research team talking about something, or you've been working with them around secondary transition. And so who are you as a researcher right now, and what experiences have you been a part of, and how can you link those together? So that's the starting point, which you'll be referring to your dissertation or to the study that you just talked about, but also, now we want to move forward. So this is kind of the big part, is your potential line of research. So who are you going to be? Who do you want to be starting, next fall when I move and I'm at this new university? What are the first steps that I'm going to take to move forward? Think about these things. So rather than I'm just really super interested in STEM, think about how you will collaborate. How might you collaborate with the people that you're going to be interviewing with within your program? within the department, across departments, across different colleges and schools, and beyond your university. And so you might actually, kind of write down these things and just brainstorm. Like, I would love to reach out and work with this center or whatever. Think about how you are going to be this person that isn't just collaborating or just working with yourself at your new school, and it doesn't really link to anything else that's going on already. So I wanted to show you, I think the best way really, this was my research agenda from my first job search. And I started off, I thought it would just be easiest to start off with kind of the big idea of what was my topic? What was I, really trying to center everything around? And which was general curriculum access for kids with intellectual disabilities. And so when I kind of went to that, that's a huge topic. So from there, I branched out to teaching math and teaching science and inclusive practices aligned to academics. And so from there, that kind of tried to kind of define me of what is my, it's general curriculum access, but it's not just anything and everything. These were the specific things I was interested in. And so the next row was actually studies that I had been a part of in some way or another. So these were all things that were on my Vita already. And within those, so you may not have as many but that's okay. Show that line. So it could be general curriculum access and math, and you could have your dissertation listed there. Or you could have a research assistantship, or you could have that you were part of teaching, or maybe I'm thinking of something else, maybe an article that you wrote for a newsletter. Put in anything that you links to your capability of bringing that research line and what you do as a scholar together. So within that research, over are publications or things that were submitted for publication that were on my Vita. And within those studies, I then linked to what I wanted to do next. So that last column is things that I thought would be my next step. Now, I think you have to be really careful that you don't go crazy. There's lots of ideas, I'm sure, that you have of where you want to go. If you seem too big, what I would be concerned about is, wow, that's a lot that they want to do. Are they going to be able to focus? So those were some of the things that I wanted to do moving forward. And I looked at what were other people focusing on within my hope to be new department, and could I link? One of the studies I included at one of the universities I applied for was, I added on, was looking at inferential text comprehension for students with hearing loss and intellectual disabilities, because the program had a huge deaf studies as part of it. So I wanted to show ways that I would be able to collaborate, bring something to the table, but also collaborate in a reciprocal way with my potential new colleagues. So thinking about that line of research, where do you want to go? And this, if you haven't done this before, this is actually kind of it can be a really fun activity, and it can really help focus you as a researcher. So even though you're doing it for this research talk, it has, a huge benefit in the long run for you moving forward of how can you stay focused. And something I would honestly suggest doing every once in a while through the tenure process, and doing it over, throughout your career, just making sure you're staying focused with a good line of research. So basically, the whole point of your research agenda is to tell your potential new colleagues if you're hireable, because you will be successful in getting tenure or successful as a contributing researcher in the department. So where do you see yourself in 5 years, and what is it that's going to get me, why would I want to hire you moving forward? do your background research. Like I said before, read the faculty page. You might find people that are doing things that you're like, oh, wow, that would be a great fit. We could do this together. And have those things on your research agenda or things that you mention, so that you know, I know that you have a strong program in STEM. I would love to help build research around STEM education and students with severe disabilities. I mean, that would be something that I might say. So thinking about that, read the faculty page for other department faculty who have similar and complementary research agendas. And think about how you can weave that in your research agenda moving forward if you were to go to that university. So again, your research agenda could change for each interview because you may have one or two studies that would be able to move forward with that research agenda if you got that specific position. What are the needs and dynamics of the local school system and state initiatives? That's a little bit harder digging to do, but if you can tie in how your research contributes to the community you would be joining and how that would bring, that you would be able, I know that this state is focused on X, Y, and Z. Therefore, I believe my research, and this would be a great opportunity for me to collaborate with the state or with the local schools on this need. Start planning early, practice, practice, practice. You keep hearing that, but that's the biggest thing. And that's going to help you just feel better about what you're doing and not ramble and go too quick. Make sure you match your CV and your job description to your research talk. Linking, what it is that's on your CV that you were already sold them enough to be on campus for this research talk. Link that as you can and highlight those things. Again, you're demonstrating your potential and be creative, but professional. So the last part of this talk is your question and answers, and making sure that you leave enough time for people to ask you questions. Again, those questions, try not to ramble, answer them quickly, and then ask, is there more I can elaborate on this? So that you don't take too much time going deeper than they wanted you to go in the first place, and you only can field one or two questions. You want to open it up to as many people being able to ask their questions if possible within your time. Be personable and interactive. That's a fabulous question. I often, wonder that too, and here's some of the reasons why my research, attacks that. You be prepared for questions like, how might you fund your future research? That's something that a dean of research might ask, but it's also something that could come up here. This is great, and it sounds wonderful. How would you plan to fund this? Talk about, one way to prep is reread your article, reread your dissertation. Often we write these things and we send them in and then we don't actually reread them. So make sure you know it front and back, and you remember everything you did with detail. So we've asked some early career scholars and junior faculty in the field on their suggestions and what they're looking for in research presentations.
Top tips for doing a job talk. Practice, practice, practice. When I would drive my car or ride my bike, I would recite my job talk and I could visualize my slides. And in order to do this, my job talk had to flow and the transitions from slide to slide had to make logical sense. So make sure that it tells the story of your research and where it's going. Rehearse your job talk with other doc students, family members, and your advisor, and be open to their feedback. Go to job talks at your university to get an idea of what it is like. Look at their slides and decide what you like and you don't like about their style or their presentation. The job talk was one of the most fun parts of the interview process. Even if you don't get the job, it is a great opportunity to share your research, and you never know when a connection can be made.
My first tip is to practice, practice, practice. Ask the search chair or whoever is corresponding with you about what are the norms in their college or in their program for job talks. So you may have on your schedule an hour for your job talk, but if it's the norm for you to only speak for 30 minutes and offer 30 minutes for questions, that would be helpful to know as you're preparing. For me, I did not want to feel rushed. And I know that when I go to job talks and I see that the candidate is rushed, it makes me feel worried for them. So I would practice, know how much time you have allotted, and make sure that you stick to that time so that there's plenty of time for faculty to ask questions.
One, I would prepare to at least talk about a single study in length. And two, paint a picture on how that single study contributes to your overall research line and trajectory of upcoming publications and grant submissions.
Another tip that I have for doing a job talk is to make sure that you don't just jump into the job talk, but that you also provide a little bit of an overview of yourself and your background, as well as your career path and your career trajectory, to give your audience a good picture of who you are as a researcher, not just what research you're presenting that day.
Great. So as you heard multiple times, we prepare. All right, and so let's get the perspective as well of some of our senior faculty and what they like to see as new faculty are coming in or potential faculty for job talks.
Top tips for doing a job talk. Practice, practice,
Oh.
practice.
Okay, there we go.
I would expect to see that the person is demonstrating that they have a line or an agenda of research that they can pull through into a successful career from the beginning of a faculty position to when they receive tenure. So do you have a line of research? Are you an expert in that particular area? And do you have a plan for conducting additional work that you could do at the University of Virginia or where you're applying? That's number one. And also, I really like to see organization, and I like to see a clear and concise job interview talk, and then with time for folks to ask questions, and so they can engage with you with your research ideas.
What I like to see in job talks is the presentation of a single study front to back. I like to see an applicant be able to clearly articulate a study in which they had a leadership role and a study that's representative of the work they've done or the work that they are doing. It's okay to talk about multiple lines of research that you have, but do so perhaps at the right point in time. Sometimes when applicants try to talk about too many studies or too many projects or too many lines of research, things get too scattered. And so I think there's a lot of value in presenting a single study, showing a nice, showcasing your ability to communicate a study in that way. I think there's a lot of value to that in a job talk. And also being respectful of your time limits as well, and saving a lot of time for discussion. That's key, and that's what faculty and research committees like to see.
I would say that an engaging job talk, one where the candidate is able, again, similar to what I said for the cover letter, able to weave together some of their prior research products and tell a story with them and essentially present a line of research. It's sort of like a what do I want to do in 5 years almost approach is important. And then being able to highlight maybe specific research projects, it could be your dissertation, that basically demonstrates how you sort of already started to launch that line of research.
So a lot of same information really, but who are you as a researcher and where will you be in 5 years? So last final tips, kind of make the presentation interesting. Have passion about what you're talking about, and be excited about your research. One thing to think about is you are the expert. If this is your dissertation, there is probably no one in that room that knows what you're talking about as much as you do. You just lived it in every inch of your body. So be excited and be passionate about it and show your interest in why you want to move forward. Again, sell it. Why is it important? And make it personal. One strategy I've seen is using the school colors in your presentation, maybe a catchphrase from the school logo at the end. Do you have any questions? Go Mavs, whatever it is at the end. Showing that this presentation is for them, for this job interview that you've presented and you're ready for them as a department, not something generic you're doing on your road tour, but that it is. And connect your research, again, to your future colleagues or local schools as much as you possibly can. So now we wanted to spend a time, and we've invited Liz Stevens to come and join us to talk more about one of those other presentations we do on the Job Talk, which you may or may not, depending on the school, is a teaching presentation. Thanks, Liz, for joining us.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for having me. I am excited to be here with you all. So I thought I would give you guys just a few slides on some tips and suggestions for doing a teaching demonstration. So the first thing that I would say is to ask a lot of questions in order to prepare. So the first thing you want to think about is, will you be teaching an existing class, or will you be sort of put into, or do you, sorry, let me start over. So what is the class that you're going to be teaching? So they might have you just go into an existing class and tell you, this is the course and this is the lesson that we want you to teach, or the content that this class is currently on. And so you're going to have to just kind of jump in and roll with it. Or they might assemble students for you, and then you are able to decide what you want to teach and teach that group of students. So it's really important to know that because you may have control over the content that you're going to teach, or you may not have control. And so that's kind of an important thing to think about. The other thing that you want to ask is, who are the students? So are the students undergraduates? Are they graduate students? And you want to think about, what their prior knowledge might be. So, is there information that students already have coming into your teaching demonstration, or are there things that you're going to need to teach them? So you want to be really mindful of that and think about things, are there foundational skills that they might need to know in order to understand your lesson? Or are you can you expect that they maybe already know those things? So the other thing that you want to think about are the logistics. So how much time, you want to ask a lot of questions about the logistics. How much time do you actually have for your lesson? What is the room set up? So for example, are there tables? Are you going to be in a big lecture room? You want to think about that. And will the search committee be there? Because sometimes they typically are going to watch you. And so you want to think about that as well. And even think about having, materials so that you have enough for them if they're going to be watching you. And then when in the day are you going to teach your lesson? So next slide, Bree. So once you think about all of those things, then you can actually start to prepare. So for example, the first thing that I would recommend is to choose a familiar topic. So this is not the time to try something new. You want to feel really comfortable with something that you know well, that you feel comfortable teaching. The second thing is to structure your lesson in a way in which you budget your time. So in the beginning, I would say, plan a brief introduction that gives you an opportunity to get to know students. So you don't have a lot of time to do that, but it's kind of awkward to be, thrown into a group of students that you don't know. And so you want to kind of break the ice in a way that you can get to know them briefly, and then feel a little more comfortable jumping into your lesson. The next thing that I would say is to think about how you're going to actually teach the content. So are you going to model if you're teaching an instructional practice? How are you going to kind of do a brief lecture or introduce your topic? And then in what ways are you going to allow for discussion or activities or ways for students to practice and apply what you're teaching them? And then finally, how will you wrap it up in the end? So as you're thinking about the structure of your lesson and how you're going to budget your time, you also want to think about just using good teaching practices. So what do students, what do you need to teach students? And I mentioned that earlier, based on their prior knowledge. What can you expect that they already know versus what do you need to teach them? And then, how, especially if you're teaching, instructional practices, how are you going to do that sort of using an explicit instruction framework? So are you going to model for them how to teach that practice? Will you practice with them and then give them an opportunity to practice on their own with feedback? So, be mindful of your talk versus, student talk. You don't want to lecture too much. You want to make it really interactive and engaging. And then you also want to embed checks for understanding. Another thing to think about are your grouping practices. So you don't want to do everything whole group. So how can you utilize maybe small groups or even partner work? And then, in special education, we always sort of need to expect the unexpected. So you want to allow for flexibility. You never know what might come up. You may plan for a small group activity thinking that 25 people are going to come. And then if you only have 5 students come to your lesson, then you may need to adjust your plan. So just sort of be prepared to be flexible. And then finally, you want to get your materials together. So if you're using PowerPoint slides, don't read your slides, make them interesting and engaging, and then have your handouts ready to go. So bring all of that so that on the day of, you don't have to worry about it. And then finally, as everyone has been saying today, you want to practice, but don't practice too much because you don't want it to seem robotic. You want it to be authentic. And then I think that the last thing you do is that you deliver your lesson. So just be yourself. I think for me, in my experience, this was a time when I could kind of breathe a sigh of relief. I felt more nervous about the job talk and have fun with it. This was a chance for you to really showcase your teaching skills. And then what I have next for you all is just some slides to show you what we've talked about. So, this was my beginning slide that just talked about introductions. I had students use name cards, which I found to be really helpful because, rather than saying, hey, you in the red shirt in the second row, I could actually call on students by name, and that helped, even so briefly to develop a little bit of a sense of community before I started the lesson. And it also gives you an idea of who students are. And then the next thing I did is I had an agenda.
Emily, we have one question really quick. Being that right now with COVID, we might have some virtual presentations. Do you have any advice for if you were to do this virtually or?
Yeah, I think a good way is to have people do introductions through the chat box. And then it gives you an idea as the presenter, you kind of know who's there and maybe what grades they're interested in teaching, maybe what experience they have. So you can give them a set of questions and they can answer them in the chat box. That's probably how I would handle that. I think that's a really good question.
Yeah, and you may, I'm thinking, Emily, that you may want to just set up a pretend class with some of your friends and try out that technology, because that can be really a little scary too if you're not familiar with using like Zoom or different platforms with other people.
Yeah, good question. So then on this slide, I just had a brief agenda to tell students, this is what we're going to do. This is what you can expect, what's coming up. And then I gave them really clear objectives on the next slide. And then I think, Bree, you can just kind of roll through these. This was an example of how I set up the modeling. So when I taught word problem solving schemas. And so I taught first the 3 different schemas and explained those. And I modeled for students how you identify each of those word problem types. I gave them an example. You can go to the next slide. Oh, this is going to look differently because it's on the different format. So anyways, this is how I set it up. And we talked about, that the missing information can be in different locations. And then on the next slide, I showed students the equation to help them solve the problem and the graphic organizer. And then this was how I modeled how to solve the problem using all of that information that I just showed them. So I went through an actual example. And you can see there's the animations to make it more engaging. And then on the next slide, it's a lot of animations. On the next slide, I had a check for understanding. So I did this sort of a turn and talk after I introduced each word problem type to make sure that students understood each schema. And then the next thing that I did is I embedded guided practice. And so we solved a problem together. And then finally, I did independent practice. And so in this case, what I did was to provide a table of a set of different word problems. And you can go to the next slide, Bree. And so here's the table. They actually got this in an envelope. So I cut all of these up and I gave them to groups of students. And you can see that I kind of made the word problems about, it was about either fall or graduate, being a graduate student, because it was kind of close to finals time. Yeah. And then they had to read these problems and sort them. And so that was the way that was their independent practice activity. And then this was a graphic organizer that I gave them to take notes as I was doing the modeling and the lecturing so that they were engaged. And then they also had this as a support when they went to do the sorting activity as a guide. They could use this and a reference. And then the last slide was just I thought about ways to support students. So as they were practicing, if they got stuck, this was a slide that I had up on the screen that they could use. And that's pretty much it. So those are some examples of how you might think about it.
Wonderful. Obviously very engaging your students and demonstrating. I think this is your chance to demonstrate your own knowledge about a topic, but your strategies to reaching your students. So final thoughts really are know your crowd. Oh, sorry, Elizabeth, this was yours. Know your crowd, know who your students are and where they are in the program, and be able to speak about your teaching and your teaching philosophy. Who are you as a teacher and what do you believe? What are some of the ways that you, because after you've done that, your search committee will likely maybe even reflect with you a little bit, maybe either formally or informally, about the lesson you just did. So be prepared to explain, why did I do that graphic organizer? Why did I do the things I did? And know your teaching. So thank you, Liz, for sharing that. That was fabulous. So, we've covered a lot of grounds today, really the research talk and the teaching talk and being prepared. And now you've gotten this on-campus, interview, and how are you selling yourself once you're there? And your skills as a researcher and as an educator. Next week, we will be coming back if you'd like to join us. And our next webinar is next Friday. And it is on now that you've got the job, now what? How do you negotiate? So after you have nailed it in your research talk and your teaching, and they want you because you've shown how fabulous you are, how do you negotiate and how do you get that job and really have it be everything you want it to be? Again, thank you for joining us today and joining us on the webinars brought to you by the Division for Research. Again, if you liked what you saw and would like to support our programming and future programming, feel free to make a small donation, and we greatly appreciate it. And it does help us move our division forward of being able to support our researchers in the field. And think about joining DR if you're not already a member. We would love to have you. So our next webinar, and it's our last one. Please, hope to see you next week. And thank you for joining us today.
Thanks all.